Well, hello field campers. Welcome back. This is another exercise from the field that I'm going to ask you to go to the Google Earth coordinates that are listed below, and then to use Google Earth Pro, the mapping tool, to map out the anticlinal feature that's here, okay, which you can begin to make out the shape of this behind me. So we're in an area that's known as Block Mountain. This is in southwestern Montana, just north of the town of Dillon, Montana, University of Montana Western. I'm here with University of Oregon's field camp, and we are just one of many field camps that come out to stay at University of Montana Western and around in the area, all coming to these wonderful world-class field areas for field classes like Block Mountain. So there's plenty of other projects that are in the area and neat things to look at, and some field camps spend an entire 6 weeks out here. Okay, so this area is actually a very well-known field camp location where, again, dozens, hundreds of students come out here each year. Actually today, there's University of Oregon, there's University of Washington, and then Eastern Washington University students that are all out here mapping. So I'm not going to reveal a whole lot about this field area for those reasons, that there are a lot of really interesting things out here that students, walking around with their map boards are working really, really hard to make a good map out here, so they can then interpret their entire map that they made. So we're just going to stick to one of the core features that's in the area. This is what's known as the Sandy Hollow Anticline. The Sandy Hollow Anticline, which you can begin to see sort of behind me, this shape right here is the anticlinal shape, and then if you look even further behind there, there's kind of this reddish rock unit that you can see runs around the landscape here. I'm sure I can't keep my finger on it, but runs around the landscape here, and if my camera angle is wide enough, you can even begin to see it come around back in this direction. And that is no illusion, folks, right? The rocks on this side are I'm looking north, so the rocks out here on the west side are actually dipping to the west. And then out here in the nose of the fold, those rocks are actually dipping to the north. Okay, and then over here on the east, the eastern limb, they are actually dipping to the east. So this is, let me get a piece of paper out here. This is a perfect textbook example of a fold, of an anticlinal fold, okay? But clearly we're not seeing a cross-section of this fold like you would in a cross-sectional sense. This fold is plunging, it's plunging to the north, and if you look down on this plunging anticline, cut it off right here to make a landscape surface, the shape of a plunging anticline shows up basically as a cross-section, or your map surface is then a cross-section at an angle of this plunging fold. Okay. Again, the Google Earth coordinates the coordinates are listed below, so use those to go on Google Earth and use Google Earth Pro and the mapping tool to map out this anticline. Well, how are you going to do that, right? You're not out here with your boots and your rock hammer to look at each one of these units. So we'll take some time maybe later to go through each one of these units and give you a little bit of exposure to what these rock units are. But really the skill here that I would like you to do is come up with your own what we call mappable units. Okay? Using Google Earth, what's really easy to see are these color contrasts, right? Just like the red ridge that's behind me out here clearly shows up as red, and then the kind of whitish color above that, the middle limestone unit, is a different color, it's a different lithology, so map it that way, and map a contact between those two rocks. Okay, so that's a really good example of a contact, is between the red and the sort of yellowish gray right here, and that one similarly goes all the way around the field area. You should be able to map that from Google Earth. Another contact that's right here directly behind me, this ledgy sort of unit is known as the upper Dinwoody. It's kind of a chocolatey brown reddish color from a distance, and it always forms these really nice ridges and ledges out here in the field. So that's one way we can tell it apart, is that it's a ridge former. Well, just below that, here is a contact with the upper Dinwoody to the lower Dinwoody, which tends to have more siliciclastic input, but really fine grained, so it has some shaly some silty shale carbonates, and being shaly, it erodes more easily, so it forms a slope former. Okay, does that make sense? I hope. A ridge former tend to be made of more resistant rock types, and slope formers tend to be made of less resistant rock types, so they form slopes or even valleys at some time. Okay. Similarly, and this one's really difficult to see behind me because, well, it's a valley former, so it's in the valley behind me, is a unit known as the Morrison, Jurassic Morrison. And that is also a siltstone that weathers out relatively easily, and it's gray and outcrop. So just with that short description of these units, you can, using Google Earth, you can probably map out the shape of the fold here between the contact of the lower Dinwoodie and the upper Dinwoodie, between the Dinwoodie and the valley former that sits above it, the Morrison, which is gray in color, and then between the Morrison and the hard ridges of the clastic units that have some of these red beds, and then those clastic units to the middle limestone. So if you can just map those couple of contacts and then make a screenshot for me and show me that that you can see that map pattern, that's the assignment that I'm asking you for. Okay. Now let me be a little bit more straightforward about these rock units that are here. So you have a stratigraphic age associated with these. We have what we just went through is the Triassic Dinwoodie lower. Okay, that's TR, and they're kind of smashed together for Triassic Dinwoodie lower. Then we have the Triassic Dinwoodie upper, the Jurassic Morrison, JM. Then above that, the Cretaceous, K, Kootenai Formation, okay, and we call that the lower clastic, so we'll put an L there for lower. Then we have the Cretaceous Kootenai middle limestone, so M for middle. And then a unit above that also has some of these red beds you may be able to see from Google Earth. On the stratigraphically upper side of middle limestone is the Cretaceous Kootenai upper clastic, KKU. And there are plenty more rock units that are in this area to look at, and there are also some rock units below this. Okay. So of these rock units below, slightly older than this is the Permian Phosphoria Formation, the PP Formation, which is made up of a chert. So it's hard and it's siliceous. You can imagine it probably stands up as a higher ridge. Okay, so you have ridge former, valley former, ridge former, valley former, and on and on and on. So this is why students, actually universities, flock from around the nation to come to areas like this, because the rock units are very well exposed, as you can see behind me. This anticline is written on the landscape, and the exercise here then for students is to be able to map this on a topographic map. And I'm asking the same thing of you, is to map this using your digital skills on Google Earth to be able to define your own colored map units and make this anticlinal shape. Okay. The Phosphoria Formation, being a harder resistant unit, is stratigraphically down from the Dinwoodie. So again, behind me here, if I'm down here at lower Dinwoodie and I walked down this valley in this direction, okay, to the south, and I'm in an anticline, the older units are in the core of the anticline, I should get into Phosphoria Formation then, right? Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, we'll take a look at that in just a second. But I want to now kind of ask the question, as we should after we map this area, how did these folds form, right? What is the mechanism of folding here? Okay, a little bit of academic backstory is that we are standing in what's known as the severe fold and thrust belt. Okay, you can see the fold behind me. This formed during the severe orogeny, during compression of Western North America. And these are all, academic details that you can read on your own. I can give you some resources, and we do talk about this out here in the field and in field camps. But that's for kind of the academic setting. In the mapping setting, we're really just trying to catalog Earth's materials. Where is this rock unit? Where is this rock unit? What is their relationship? Okay, but also it really does help to know mechanisms of structural geology. So when I see a feature like this, an anticline, I can think of the mechanism, and then I can look for other features that may be related to that. Okay, so the mechanism here, remember from your structural geology class, folds form in a couple of different ways. There's, for example, a fault bin fold, where a thrust fault may as it's angled, it may find a weak plane in bedding and go along bedding for a while and then ramp back up. And this geometry then has the effect, as the upper plate is moving over the lower plate, over this weird geometry of the fault, it bends the overlying units. Okay, so that's one type, but then there's also the fault propagation fold. Okay, and that's what we're looking at here. So I wanted to kind of get us up to speed there. The fault propagation fold. First, remember, sedimentary rocks are flat-lying, originally horizontal, and laterally continuous from your principles of geology. And remember, superposition. The older rock units are at the bottom. Okay, so if this is the general geology of these Western North American rock units during this time, but then Western North America compression begins to, form thrust faults. Okay, so here's a thrust fault that's propagating up from depth. The hanging wall is moving up over the footwall, recall. Well, what happens here, if this is faulting structurally down, that has the effect above of warping these units. So structurally below, I may see an offset in some of these rock units, but structurally above, these rock units become folded because of that fault. So what that begins to look like then are folds that have thrust faults. This is fairly simplified, but have thrust faults that are in the core of the folds. Okay, are you with me? So the predictive power then here is, okay, this is how a fold and thrust belt may forms. I see a fold out here on the landscape. If that is stratigraphically and structurally up in that direction, where the rock units are just warped, okay, younger and younger and younger, higher and higher and higher, if I instead turn around and I walk to the south, and I walk structurally, and in this case, stratigraphically, lower, I should be able to get into older rock units, for one, older in the core, but also I may be able to pick up on where this thrust fault offsets some of those units. So this is where it's really important that we do have an academic background in structural geology mechanisms and sort of regional understanding while coming out into the field. We can see this feature, and that immediately starts to think of, well, what's the mechanism? How did this fold form? Where is the thrust fault, is what I start thinking. Okay, so this is going to be a little bit tricky. I'm going to have to move the tripod a little bit around this anticline. And this is, if you haven't already mapped the area, you can pause the video in a second and map this feature in as well. Or if you have already mapped it, please map this additional feature as we look. So the additional features are sort of more of the core of the anticline with older units, but the thrust fault particularly. And please use a different color of line for that thrust fault. Okay, so I'm really just going to turn almost 180 degrees around, probably about 155, 160, and try to point out the shape of this anticline as we go. So recall, what we're looking for is evidence of a thrust fault then. Okay, well first, if you look at the anticline right here, it's actually a little bit messed up in the top right here. Remember, these rocks are generally, how am I doing this? These rocks are generally dipping to the east, and then these rocks are dipping on the other side of the anticline, are dipping to the west. And so here's your hinge where they're basically dipping off to the north. But if you look closely, they're kind of broken. It's kind of, you can maybe even be able to identify a little bit of offset. So in context of this thing, the thrust fault has maybe barely broken a little bit of these units up here in the hinge, okay? Now if we continue then, structurally down the anticline, okay, so there's a valley that's mostly made up, or that's all made up of lower Dinwiddie. Okay, continue down the valley, lower Dinwiddie, lower Dinwiddie, lower Dinwiddie, lower Dinwiddie, lower Dinwiddie. There's the contact with upper, and then you begin to see a harder rock unit there in the middle. Okay, this right here, a harder rock unit that goes from the hard stuff, the Permian Phosphoria Formation, lower Dinwiddie. There's the contact with upper Dinwiddie. Okay, so now we've gotten further into the core of the anticline, and we can see older rock units. Okay, this is great. Older rock units, older rock units. Oh, whoa! There's a big mountain back there. There's a big cliff. Okay, and that's made of yet an older rock unit below the Phosphoria, known as the Pennsylvanian Quadrant Formation. It's a very hard sandstone, almost a quartzite, where the grains, or where the rock actually breaks across the grains. So it's a ridge former, stands up very high, obviously. Okay, so we continued structurally down the fold, and we now see the core here. There's kind of a peculiar little double bump to this Phosphoria formation that you might be able to see. Okay? But besides that, here we have the older Pennsylvanian age rock. And then these rock units downslope, you can see are steeply dipping, are back to Cretaceous age rocks. Those are Kootenai rocks, or Cretaceous in age. So here we have older rocks, Pennsylvanian rocks, structurally on top of these much younger Cretaceous age rocks. Okay, and that relationship where you have rock units that are older, that are being put on top of younger rock units, that's a thrust relationship, right? If you go from this layer, thrust. So this relationship in the back can really only be can only be ramified by a thrust fault. And that thrust fault is about right here between those vertical beds that you can see and then this large cliff. So that thrust fault was taking these much older rock units from below and thrusting them on top of the Cretaceous age units. That thrust fault, if you continue that same orientation out here to the north, okay, it runs through the Big Hole area, down kind of V's into the valley down here, and then comes down into the valley, up along this slope. Up along this slope. Okay, it splits a little bit of the Phosphoria right here, so there's actually 2 bits of Phosphoria that are broken, so the thrust fault continues through there, and then it comes up into the core of our anticline. Okay, so again, the point here is what we just mapped. Let me get my picture back out here. What we just mapped then is, or we can see here in the field, is essentially this picture, but lying on its side, right? So the map orientation here, your map that you're going to make on Google Earth, is going to look a lot like this, where you have a fault in the south that is breaking units and setting older units on top of younger, but then to the north is only warping, or is only folding the units that are above. Okay, again, this is world-class geology. Here in this whole region, rock units are very well exposed on the surface, so it's easy to see from one ridge to the other and to begin to map in contacts once you know these rocks. That is a very big advantage to getting students out here, and I think this is a big advantage also for you folks being able to digitally take a field camp and use Google Earth to see really amazing features like this that are exposed at the surface. Okay, so again, to recap a little bit of your assignment is go to the coordinates in Google Earth below, or use those coordinates to go to this site on Google Earth, and then map out this anticline and the fault, the thrust fault, that is responsible for making this anticline. Okay, that's the Sandy Hollow thrust and the Sandy Hollow anticline. If you can then please make a screenshot for me and put that screenshot as a picture in a Word document that describes, just you have your map, and then give me a little description on how you were able to map those rock units. What features did you use? Why did you draw some of those contacts in this area or that area? Okay, so first your sort of mapping technique, and then if you could give me just a short description on the relationship between the feature that you mapped as a fault and the feature that you mapped as a fold. Okay, so that's it for this part of the exercise. I'm going to continue to go look around in the field out here, and I may be able to give you a few videos on the rock types that are here and identifying those, and we may be able to do a short strike and dip exercise that if you have access or you're able to check out a Brunton compass from your local university, then you can do an exercise with getting used to using a Brunton compass. Okay, well, that's our digital field camp for today. Thanks for joining me out here in Block Mountain. This is Sammy signing off, and we'll talk to you again soon, folks.